What's up, everybody? Welcome to On West Gray, the monthly podcast about all things local government in the city of Norman. I'm your host, Tiffany Verska, Chief Communications Officer for the city of Norman, and we appreciate you tuning in. Today in the studio with us, we have Mr. Jason Murphy of our Public Works Stormwater Division. The Stormwater Division is responsible for the protection of the health, safety, and welfare of Normanites by reducing the impact of flooding, erosion, and water pollution. This may look like drainage, canal clearing, street sweeping, rain garden installation, or flood warning system management. Today, we're going to learn more about some of these responsibilities, as well as what's on the horizon as the city continues moving forward with our AIM Norman comprehensive planning process. And stormwater is an element of that process. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So let's jump into it. Can you tell us your official title and what your division is really responsible for?
Sure. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager for the City of Norman. Our division is responsible for maintenance of the stormwater infrastructure throughout the city. So whether that's the inlets, the drains you see on the side of the roads, the pipes that are moving that water somewhere, keeping the channels clear, the creeks or the cement channels that we have. So we're responsible for the stormwater maintenance as well as larger capital projects, stream bank restoration, things like that, the larger capital projects the city does to that end, as well as we do floodplain management for the city as well.
Okay, so break that down a little bit. It's essentially like flood and debris, infrastructure management and maintenance. So you talked about like the pipes and kind of the drainage channels. So those channels on the side of the road, when it rains and water runs off, goes into those channels, like where does that water go? Why is this important?
Well, it's important for a couple reasons. First is just safety, getting the water moved away from structures, houses, businesses, et cetera, and then off the street so that cars can continue to move safely. So I'm hearing we don't want our homes, businesses, or cars to flood, right? Absolutely. That's one reason why it's so important. Okay. Absolutely. And that's why keeping those inlets clean, keeping the system working well so water can move, so to minimize the effects of flooding. And then the other is there's a water quality component to that as well, because in Norman, as you all know, we get the majority of our drinking water from Lake Thunderbird. And depending on where you're at in town, the water that's running off of our streets and into our stormwater system is ending up in Lake Thunderbird. The better job that we do at cleaning and keeping our streets clean and minimizing the pollutants that are going into that system, the easier it is for us to have clean drinking water and the lower cost and things like that, as well as just the environmental impact. Aside from the drinking water, Lake Thunderbird is it's important aquatic habitat for fish, birds, things like that. Recreation. People don't want to swim in a lake that's dirty or nasty or unsafe because of the pollutants that are present there.
Yes, and you talked about the aquatic habitat. I think there's kind of an interesting element to your job and the folks over in environmental services. It's true that the creatures like in these aquatic habitats in these lakes or ponds, streams, creeks, the health of them is kind of reflective of the health of our water. Is that right? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Whenever you're assessing the health of any water body, a stream, a lake, or whatever, you're looking at a lot of different things, like the nutrients that are going into that. So the nitrogen and phosphorus that you get from fertilizers or yard waste, pet waste, etc., oils that are coming off of vehicles, like all that affects everything in the water. I mean, if you're a fish, you're having to breathe this water. So if that water's dirty, you're going to have trouble breathing.
Right.
But the same thing with a lot of the other wildlife. I mean, everything from deer to raccoons and birds and everything else rely on this water for life. So we want to make sure that we keep that as clean and as good a health as we can. And there's ways of measuring that, but the biggest thing that we do as stormwater maintenance is try to prevent all of that from getting to the water in the first place.
Sure. And when you talk about you mentioned keeping the inlets clean, there's an entire division, obviously your division, that's dedicated to doing some of that, but we can all kind of have a hand in that, right? I mean, what can folks do to kind of reduce that, the pollutants in the runoff or ensure that those inlets are clean, maybe in front of their homes?
Yeah, no, I mean, just normal everyday things like picking up after yourself, keeping leaves and stuff clear when you're mowing your lawn, not letting that go into the storm drain, not throwing trash out of your car as you're driving. Things. I mean, there's things like that we can do every day.
Keeping doggy bags on you, right?
Keeping doggy bags. Paying attention to, does your yard really need that much fertilizer? Because whatever's not used is just going to run off into the storm drain.
Right.
And will contribute to algae growth and things like that. I mean, fertilizer will do what it does.
And speaking of fertilizer, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I think the OSU Extension has some sort of program where you can test your soil to see exactly like where your levels are, how you can best take care of it, if you even need fertilizer.
The OSU Extension Office does do that. They will do soil testing, so we also, in the city of Norman, we have a commercial fertilizer applicator license that you have to get. And they're required before they apply anything with phosphorus to do a soil test to prove you need it. Mm-hmm. Most soils in Oklahoma really don't need a phosphorus additive. It's pretty common in most of the environment already here. So
sure. So in taking care of your garden, maybe don't automatically assume that it just needs fertilizer. Maybe it's something else, right?
Right.
So smaller things that we can do to just all play our part in making sure that our water quality is as good as it can be. So How many folks are on your team?
The Stormwater Division in the city of Norman there's 17 maintenance worker and then 3 administrative type folks, including myself. Those 17 people are broken into a couple different crews, although everybody can do everything if necessary. But we have the street sweeping crew. So those are the guys that are driving those street sweepers that you see driving around town, keeping the roadways clear of debris, making sure those inlets are kept clear. We have a channel maintenance crew, and those are the ones that are getting into the creeks and streams throughout Norman, as well as, they're trimming trees, cleaning trash out of the channels, doing some minor repairs. There's a lot of trash that actually ends up in the channels. And then we have an infrastructure crew, and those are the ones who are doing the repairs. So all the pipes, all the inlets that, things get broken, these are the guys that can go in and, they may have to dig up part of a street to replace pipe and things like that. But we have a crew that does that. To that end, those 17 people that are doing that job, I can tell you, like last year, so from January to January, this last year, we had about 2,700 tons of debris that was removed from the inlets themselves. Wow. So those that you see on the street where the water's supposed to run, there's 2,700 tons. The street sweepers collected 1,400 tons of debris, and the channel maintenance guys removed 2,400 tons of debris. And that's just 17 guys in 1 year. That's how much they managed to pick up and collect and kept that from going into the creeks and rivers and ultimately in Lake Thunderbird or the Canadian River.
Do you know how many inlets or how many miles of channels, that your team is responsible for kind of overseeing or checking on?
Inlets were in the thousands. I mean, because you figure all the miles of street and where there is stormwater infrastructure like that, you'll have an inlet every, couple hundred feet, kind of depending on what the street calls for. Storm sewer, so the pipes that are moving the water that we're aware of, some are in the neighborhood of 200 miles. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, and this is one of the things that comes with an older city, we have a lot of infrastructure that we don't even have mapped. Things have been being installed since the 1920s.
Sure.
And, things have been added to, and, and especially up until about the 80s, there wasn't necessarily great record keeping of when, things just got done. Somebody fixed a problem. And so we have a lot of storm sewer or a lot of stormwater infrastructure that, to be honest, we don't find it till it breaks. And, we get those calls from people that, all of a sudden they have a hole forming in their front yard and we're trying to figure out what. And then we figure out that, we find out there's a stormwater pipe that's gotten a break and is creating some of those holes. And then stream channels, we're over 100 miles of stream channels specifically that we're responsible for maintaining as well.
And in addition to staff, all of the stats that you just shared about all of the cleanup efforts, it is possible, too, for citizens to volunteer to maybe pick up the litter from the stream, in their neighborhood or around the creeks or something like that. How does that process work?
Well, from the very simplest thing of if you're out walking, you're in a park, you see trash, and people do this all the time. They'll pick up that water bottle or that food wrapper or whatever and put it in there. I mean, that's just the simplest thing. Just be a good steward as you're out and about your city. If you see trash that is safe for you to pick up and remove, do so. One of the other things that we try to encourage people, especially in areas where you have flooding, is kind of keep those inlets that you do have in front of your house. Like while we have street sweepers, again, we have 17 staff members. We have a fairly long list of things that we're trying to get to, and they're really good. But especially if there's a storm coming, just something as simple as, keeping the leaves off of that inlet in front of your house. And we have a lot of citizens who do that really help us out because they're aware that when those get clogged, that they're more likely to have flooding. Like water's going to come over the curb and into their yard, potentially into houses. And so just kind of keeping an eye, letting us know if there's a bigger problem that we need to come address. You can certainly call us and we'll respond within 24 hours and get out there and help. But even just, on an individual level, during the fall, go out there and just scrape the leaves off the top of the inlet and go ahead and throw it in your, trash bin or compost pile, whatever you have. And
put that in your yard waste pile.
Sure.
Turn it into great compost. And I know recently we had launched the Keep Norman Neat initiative too. If you have a group of folks or a social club or civic group that kind of want to volunteer together, you can sign up online. I think you just need like 2 to 3 days notice. The city will fund the bags, the gloves, anything that you might need for that. And
Absolutely.
So if you just go to normanok.gov and search Keep Norman Neat, that should come up for you. So what kind of projects or programs have your team been working on recently?
For a larger scale, like capital type project, and these are the ones that take multiple years and millions of dollars, we're in the middle of a stream bank restoration project on Lower Imhoff Creek. And so for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with Norman, Oklahoma, Imhoff Creek is the creek that starts up here by Andrews Park, here on Gray, and runs all the way through the, core Norman, and down underneath Highway 9 and eventually down into the Canadian River. But this is, the oldest part of Norman that has been being built up, the oldest parts of town. The original site of Norman was basically the headwaters of Imhoff Creek. So you have this creek that has had all this urbanization that has occurred around it over, the last, 140 years or so. And especially down on the lower end, as urbanization's occurred, you have more and more runoff that occurs because you create more impervious areas. So water can't soak into the ground as well. And then one of the things that comes with urbanization and streams normally want to move. Like they'll wind their way back and forth, and that's what they do to dissipate energy. But as you build a city around it, it loses the ability to move.
Sure.
So instead of moving side to side, it'll really start cutting down deep. And this has happened on Lower Imhoff. If you've been down around Imhoff Road, and you can look and see just where that's really just dug the sides of the creek out, and like there's multiple homes down there that they've lost half their backyards at this point, and this is moving towards houses. We've had utilities, gas, electric, all these things that are being exposed. And so a few years back, we went and found some grant funding and have been working through that process, working with FEMA, and we're going to go in, and one of the things we don't want to do is just pour concrete everywhere.
Sure.
So one of the great things about Imhoff Creek, aside from, it's part of historic Norman, the WPA channel and everything else. When you get down there, people who live near Imhoff Creek love it. There's so much wildlife. When you get down in that channel, you've got fish, you've got the bugs, you've got birds. We went down there to, inspect this section of creek. We've been down there a lot of times, but there's a snowy egret, this beautiful white bird that's, down there fishing. There's an otter that lives down there, somewhere between Imhoff Road and Highway 9. If you've never seen an otter in a creek, they're so much fun to watch, and they're very rare. So we need to restore this channel to protect citizens. You got to protect Imhoff Road. When that bridge failed a few years ago, and for that 9 months or so that road was closed, it had a huge impact to people just trying to go to work, go to school, that kind of. And so like we need to protect that channel so we can protect that bridge so it's safe for people to travel and they can get where they need to go. But also we just need to keep the natural integrity of the stream, so that the people who live there can enjoy it. They love watching those birds, and anytime we've talked to them, like they're very passionate about it. And so we're trying to find a more natural way of protecting this, but also protecting the environmental integrity of and keeping the aesthetics, keeping it pretty. And so that is one of the big ongoing projects that council's really supported us and helped us with funding and things like that. But thankfully we were able to find, I mean, this is a $4 million project. We were able to find federal funding to help with that.
You're protecting property and infrastructure and the natural environment. So each of these things has an element to what you do.
And then on a smaller, more day-to-day scale, a few years back, we instituted a drainage rehabilitation program. And we did this because we were trying to find a way that have the most impact citywide, not just a single creek or whatever, that we could improve, stormwater drainage. And so this drainage rehabilitation program is kind of an annual program that those inlets that we've talked about several times so far where water runs in. Again, a lot of these are very old, they're failing, they're falling apart, they've broken. And so we started a program trying to replace, as many of these as we can in a year. And we have a priority list of the ones that are just really in bad shape. But this is just kind of a down home, like just basic maintenance. And, one that most people you overlook, but like when these things fail, the impact is immediately visible to people. And so, but that program is also being used to address just some smaller drainage projects, over on Rowena Drive, where you have a lake forming at the end of a cul-de-sac.
Yeah, that's never good.
No. Thankfully, it isn't flooding homes, but you have several inches of water, and it's problematic. And so, we've been able to use this project to improve drainage to get that water to drain off of there. To be honest, this is a great program, and we have, again, in a city like Norman, we have so many areas that we really can. We have a list much longer than we have funding to do the work with.
Right.
But at the same time, this is a really great start and moving well.
Well, and speaking of funding, so you talked about like the grant funding that you came into regarding the Imhoff Creek project there that you're doing, but the last project that you mentioned, how are these projects funded? I know a lot of other municipalities have like stormwater fees, like a utility fee that just addresses stormwater, goes to stormwater projects. So here in Norman, I don't believe we have that. So how are all of our projects funded?
So you are correct. We don't have a stormwater utility. We've gone to the voter a couple times and it's failed, unfortunately. And I think a lot of it is educating and getting people to understand what that's for. The way that we're currently funded is through council, through general revenue. So our stormwater maintenance division has about a $3 million budget, and this is the 17 people and all the equipment and like all the debris I talked about moving, and that's just our general day-to-day maintenance. And then on top of that, council has given us, currently we have a $2.3 million capital budget. So this is specifically for those larger projects. Because even when we have grant funding, there's still a local match. So, generally it's 25 to 20% that has to be provided. So the federal government will pay for 75, city has to pay 25. So if it's $1 million project, that's still $250,000 that the city has to come up with.
Right.
And council has, especially with the stormwater utilities not passing in the last 5 years, they've really shown their support for stormwater. Like they've basically doubled the capital budget in the last 5 years because they recognize how important it is for the safety of the citizens to have a well-functioning stormwater system. And so without a dedicated source of funding, council's been able to do that. The problem with funding like that is
You're taking from one to give to
right.
another, right?
And then it can vary year to year. I mean, depending on what the city's budget happens to be. And so capital budgeting like that is some years we may have what we need and some years we don't. And having a more steady source of funding would definitely be a benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you named a couple projects. How does all of this tie into how we're making our way through the AIM Norman comprehensive planning process?
The Stormwater Master Plan update that we're doing. So our original Stormwater Master Plan for the city of Norman was developed in 2009. It's honestly a great plan, and it needed a little bit of updating. And so what we're working on now is one is looking at, there was 59 priority projects that were called out in that master plan, and these were the larger scale, like capital projects. These projects were ranked in that 2009 master plan in order of importance, and it considered things like safety, environment, public safety, economic impacts, things like that. And so we're looking at those projects and reevaluating, like, are they still in the right order? Do they still even need to be on there? As well as updating the estimated cost for those projects. So again, one of the things that we've seen with this update is since 2009, the cost of most of these projects have tripled. That's 300% increase in the cost of actually doing, and that's based on what was assessed in 2009. You've also had, 15 years that these things, if something hasn't been addressed, that it's potentially getting worse.
Right.
We've managed to complete about 7 of those projects citywide since this was originally done. And the way we're able to do it was honestly with federal funding. We've been very successful with finding grant money. And grants are really what keeps us moving forward. But we also need to know exactly how much we have, and having a stormwater master plan with those projects outlined and prioritized actually helps us find federal funding too. So that's one of the really important things that's happening with this update. The other is we're sort of updating our rubric, if you will, for how we prioritize projects, kind of looking at current priorities of people. And we've done a lot of outreach with the community. We've had hundreds of responses from citizens about, when it comes to stormwater, what are your priorities as a citizen in Norman? And overwhelmingly, the answers we got were public safety and water quality. Most people actually put those two things together, which completely makes sense, but I had never thought of it. But, especially because our stormwater is our drinking water, they see water quality as a public safety concern. And that has been the overwhelming response from citizens. And so we kind of adjusted our rubric a little bit to really prioritize public safety and things like that for how we're prioritizing these capital projects. And then other than that, there's some technical updates that our engineer's doing. So there's some of the science behind everything, the hydraulics, how water runs and where it runs and things like that. They're doing a little bit of that. And then the other big thing really coming out of this that's been great for stormwater is we have a citizen committee that is looking at all the information being provided by our consultants and by city staff, and really coming up with a good set of priorities and recommendations for the overall land use plan for Norman. And these are things that they want to have included to be considered anytime that a land use for development or anything else is being done, citywide. And the big things that they've been focusing on are kind of updating, some recommendations for updating ordinance language to protect water quality. We have water quality protection zone ordinance, and I won't get into like what the specifics of that are, but the name kind of gives you an idea of what it's about. And so there's likely to be some recommendations, to kind of strengthen that.
Well, and we're expecting that completed project, I think, in the spring. For those who are kind of unfamiliar, a comprehensive plan is basically like a roadmap for the city for us to be able to make important decisions and kind of guide us in our future growth and development. And so this particular process is going to consist of updates to 7 different plans. So it's pretty ambitious, and we'll have more on that come maybe March, April, May. Well, is there anything else, Jason, that you'd like to share with us regarding what you do, your roles, responsibilities there at Stormwater?
there's so much more that we want to see done. And we see a lot of ways, staff, my staff, public works staff, even city and council has expressed a real belief that stormwater is important to the city and to public safety in particular, and finding ways to address, we have a lot of aging infrastructure. We have a lot of concerns with water quality, and if you talk to citizens, they 100% agree with that too. And so that's the thing that I'm most looking forward to, is to get more engagement and more buy-in from our citizens to help us do a better job at protecting the public safety, whether it's from flooding or whether it's protecting your drinking water source. And so if anybody has any questions about that or things that they can do, I would highly recommend they reach out and talk to city staff, whether myself or the doers that you mentioned earlier. The Michelles are amazing, and they've got a lot of really good programs and a lot of ways that, a lot of things that everyday citizens can do. And so if you have a passion, if you care about this as much as we do, feel free to reach out. We're always looking for people. We need the buy-in from the citizens to do our job well.
All right. Well, questions or comments about On West Gray can be sent into publicaffairs@normanok.gov. Shouts to our producer and editor, Mr. Bryce Holland of the City of Norman Communications Office. Visit normanok.gov/news to enroll for e-notifications on traffic advisories, upcoming events, election notices, and more from the City of Norman. Follow us on social, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, City of Norman OK. The next citywide election will be February 11th, 2025. Norman voters can cast ballots in the mayoral race, and those living in applicable odd number wards, 1, 3, 5, and 7, can cast ballots for those city council candidates. The deadline to register to vote is January 17th, 2025. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and always remember to cast your ballot. I'm Tiffany Verska. Thank you for joining us on West Gray.